My name's David Martin, and I'm a Professor of Geography at the University of Southampton. And two of my key roles are as Deputy Director of the Economic and Social Research Council's UK Data Service, and also the National Centre for Research Methods. And so my particular interest is in the methodologies which social scientists use in order to conduct research, and particularly in the way in which we measure population and we understand population change. And for most of my career I've been involved very much with the census, and as a geographer I've been involved very much in the design of the small areas which we use for censuses. I've worked very closely with the Office for National Statistics. And today I've been here at the WISERD conference and just given a keynote speech in which I was setting out the huge challenges which the social science community face when we consider that we may potentially have seen the last census of a conventional form in England and Wales. Clearly, the census has evolved, and each decade for the last 200 years we've conducted censuses with slightly different questions, using slightly different methods. New technologies have emerged. There's no sense in which the census from 2011 is like the one from 1911 or 1801. And yet, we have this amazingly precious historical record which is allowing us to understand how the population of the UK has changed over time. And modern censuses, where a huge amount of data are available digitally, allow us to investigate the characteristics of small areas, to understand how they change, and also to investigate small population groups, for example, those who speak a particular language or who are members of particular ethnic groups. And that understanding is really important in a public policy context as we try to understand the consequences of reorganising healthcare, looking at who has access to a car and can access out-of-hours facilities, as we think about how we should restructure education, and we consider the ways in which different schools are servicing catchments which represent very different communities. There are many areas in which the census data underpin the decisions that we make and the way that we understand ourselves. And social science research is also concerned with perhaps some broader, more long-term questions around the way in which families are formed and dissolved, the way in which people live together in households and communities, the way in which we make decisions and are exposed to things early in life which may then affect our life chances and our health as we get older. And the census has been a colossally rich resource for undertaking that kind of research. But as we look around the world at the moment, we see that countries that have been conducting censuses are all stepping back from them in different ways, because doing a census is a very complex exercise. It's a very costly one. So what's happening is that we're spending more and more money as a society on capturing these data, and that's because it's very hard to get people to respond. People are very busy. They generally have low levels of trust in government. They're reluctant to fill in complex questionnaires and give details about themselves. And actually it's getting more and more difficult for the census organisations to get responses from us. Now actually the 2011 census in England and Wales has been a very successful census. We've achieved high levels of response, but that's at the cost of the Office for National Statistics having to do a huge amount of work to go particularly to those areas where response is very low, and to put in a lot of extra effort capturing information about how many forms have been returned, sending out enumerators to knock on doors and chase up missing forms. And the result of all that labour has been a very good result, such that we've got 94% of the people that we think are present in the country captured on a census form somewhere. And a large coverage survey takes place, which then helps us to try and understand how many people were missed and to do some statistical adjustment so that the final numbers that are published are an estimate of the actual population based, if you like, 94% on people who were counted and 6% on people who've been modelled in to the overall picture. But we now face the challenge that we may be facing a situation where other data sources, which we already capture, we have a health service register, we have extensive structure for social security and benefits, we have a school census, which gives us lots of information about students in schools, we have a HESA, Higher Education Statistics Agency, which captures information about students in higher education. In different ways and at different stages of our lives, we provide lots of information to government. And a very valid question is whether by merging together and linking some of those data sources, we could capture enough information about contemporary society that we would be able to replace the conventional census, and we might even gain some advantages in having those data in a more timely manner, because we could do that annually. We wouldn't have the burden on individual citizens to respond to a census form, but in fact we would be able to link data about those people and still have the same intelligence. Now, there's an important public debate to be had about whether it's more acceptable to link data which is already held in secure anonymised circumstances, or whether it's more acceptable to go and ask people those questions. And that's not a simple question. People fall out very differently either side of that divide. But from a research perspective, one of the biggest challenges we face is that if we were to link together lists of people who are on the different registers, and Office for National Statistics are doing much of this research right now, it's probably true that we could get a good picture of the demography of the country, and that's effectively an understanding of the age and sex of all of the people living in the country, and down to reasonably small areas we could do that with some confidence, and we would know, if you like, who we are in terms of age and sex. But what we wouldn't be able to understand by linking those lists together is information about some of the subtler characteristics that matter a lot, because the registers we have don't capture ethnicity, they don't capture in a reliable way ability to speak the Welsh language, for example, which is particular interest to delegates at the WISERD conference. And there are many of those other questions, even basic characteristics about housing, which we ask in a census, which are very important for understanding the circumstances of people's lives, but which are not present in the administrative registers. And so the strategy, if we didn't do a full census, would be to link administrative lists to the demography, and probably we would need to institute some very large survey programme where a sample of the population were asked a census-like questionnaire, which would allow us to understand something about those other characteristics. And the big issue is, would we be able to link those things together, and would we actually be able to get a big enough sample that we would reliably be able to understand the characteristics of small groups in the population, maybe the very elderly that live alone? Would we ask enough questionnaires of those people that we could really understand the circumstances of their lives? And would we have enough detail that we could still understand geographies at the scale of what's a primary school catchment area, what's the geography of the people who would be using an out-of-hours health call centre, what's the geography of a care commissioning group in the NHS? And that's really crucial, because when we do a census, the exercise of conducting the census is very expensive, but the marginal cost of having all those precious data is quite small. Whereas if we link the lists together, the true long-term cost of linking the lists is probably much smaller than the census, but it becomes a matter of having to decide exactly how much do we want to spend in order to have that intelligence about the population. And so what I've been very much doing this afternoon is presenting to WISERD conference delegates the challenge of engaging in that debate, because the timeline is remarkably tight. Although it feels as if we had a census not very long ago, just over 2 years ago, the next one wouldn't be until 2021, actually the UK Statistics Authority need to make a recommendation to Parliament in 2014 about which route should be followed, because it has a huge research agenda and implications for public spending, which would have to be initiated very soon in order to devise the programme which would lead up either to a 2021 census, if that's still an option, or to a very different statistical system. And so my challenge really to the research community is that we need to understand now both the substantive research questions that we need answered, the ways in which we want to understand how society is changing and what data we need for that, and also the methodological challenges my particular area, as to how exactly will we link those lists together. How would we construct models of households? How would we construct data for small areas in a way which is going to meet future research needs? And we are going to not be the generation that appear to have dropped the ball and mean that when researchers come along in 2031 and 2041, they don't look back and consider us to be the people that lost something very precious without having a strategy for where the replacement data was going to come from. That's really very much the challenge of the talk I gave this afternoon.